Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's Aces High. I'm back. I'm bringing you guys a second kind of off video. So this one was requested by several of you. It's titled "The Rise and Fall and Rise and Fall and Rise of Germany." So I don't know if it's like the rise of the German Empire, and then I guess falling after World War One, and then rising for World War Two, and falling, and then rising. I really don't know. It could be the empire making its way and then falling and just I really don't know. But several of you guys have requested this. I'm a quarter German, so I love learning about German history. And I mean, it's history. It's fun to me. This video is actually by Brain for Breakfast, so if you guys haven't checked them out, they are in the description. Go check them out, and I'll have I'll have that link down there for you. Anyway, if you guys haven't subscribed, or if you're new to the channel, hit that sub button, hit that like button, leave me a comment with what you want to see, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I can. I do have a big list, but I really do try to get to as many videos as I can. You can ask some of the other commenters. I bet you they'll vouch for me. Alright, that being said, I'm going to sit back. I'm going to shut up. Grab yourself a drink, and let's watch this.
Before Germany, there was a Prussia and Austria of 37 small independent German countries. Napoleon had left Europe in an awful mess, so when he lost, the victorious met in Vienna to fix the borders that he'd thrown all into disarray. This Congress of Vienna wasn't a punishment like a certain treaty a century later would be to Germany, but instead to restabilise the continent once more by drawing out the spheres of influence, balancing enemies and allies with and against each other. And this worked, for a while. The fixed borders and disincentives to war meant that those with ambitions to conquer an empire turned their ambitions elsewhere, to other continents. But there was one fractured region in Europe that was not particularly well balanced, and the two intended balancing powers didn't have overseas colonies on which to take out their frustration. That region was Central Europe, that aforementioned Austria, Prussia, and those 37 smaller independent German countries. The war that eventually happened had been the result of a centuries-old rivalry between the two dominant German powers, and the result of the war was mostly down to four factors: the existing political order, Central European geography, the Enlightenment, and Italy. Prussia and most of the small states were situated in an area of Europe with few natural barriers. Now, while this could make you vulnerable, as the many partitions of Poland can tell you, the way German states behaved was part of what preserved the relative stability of the region despite it being in almost 300 pieces for a millennium. While individually these mostly city-states are vulnerable to outsiders, they recognise the need to band together, multiple times under multiple flags. Collections of states of roughly equal power, so none could really dominate, or at least that was the theory. So Europe was a collection of states in a delicate balance of powers, and at its centre was a collection of states in a delicate balance of powers.
Something just popped up in my head when they had the Reich counter over here. So Hitler, I think I've asked this before. Yeah, so I know it. I know. Actually, I guess I know the answer. Never mind. I'm asking stupid questions. I was gonna ask. So the Third Reich was the Nazi Party, and Germany at the time. The Second Reich was the what? Somebody answered this for me before, and I forgot. Was it the Hungarian Empire, or was it? No, it was the German Empire, right? And then the First Reich would be the Holy Roman Empire, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody answered this for sure in a different video for me. I just forgot.
In geopolitics, geography is everything. That's rivers, mountains, oceans, terrain, and where your borders lie in relation. Austria was a southeast-facing country with the majority of its land in that direction from Vienna. The branches of the Danube flowed through Austria away from traditional German lands. The Alps and Carpathians mostly protected the core from invaders, but they also isolated Austria from its interests in the north and the west, and its territories on the other side of the mountains. Contrast Prussia, a country wealthy with natural riverine connection, and none of those pesky major mountain ranges separating the political core from its wealthy and industrious regions in the west. And as well as those rivers, Prussia also had a better artificial network. Modern canals had arrived with the Industrial Revolution, and together with the smaller states, Prussia had a national railway network before its major neighbours had even connected two cities. Austria was excluded from all of this because of its geography. These networks...
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it would just be so tough to go through the mountains. I think about in the U.S., just several of the trains that we have where they'd blast through the mountains, and they would basically come to a halt as they're trying to blast through, make these tunnels and everything, or go up and over passes, and just it slows it down so much. It's so incredibly difficult. Not to mention, oftentimes you have to make these giant bridges.
Works initially implied Prussia as the leader of Germany and isolated Austria. Germany was integrated culturally, economically, militarily and bureaucratically around Berlin. And while Prussia was in the process of connecting, Austria was dividing. The Enlightenment was the culmination of a philosophical revolution that led in part to the idea of self-determination. With failures...
I gotta tell you, I'm liking this video so far, but the music, man, the music's a bit much, you know? It's just constant music that just, it's okay, but, and then every now and then you hear, what is that, Enter the Sugar Plum King or whatever that freaking dance song is from the, yeah, it just, it's interesting, I guess.
Of political and economic systems across the continent, the traditional order had been collapsing piece by piece, and in its place, new schools of thought were to arise. Here's an example of how a pre-Enlightenment country worked.
I don't want to have to pay all these taxes. I want to rule myself.
While you're living in my house, Booster, you abide by my rules.
What gives you the authority to decide what I have to do?
God, you don't know what? It's written down in this book that you can read because it's in Latin. But trust me, I know it's in there.
One socio-political philosophical revolution.
I like what they tried to do here with the NWA symbol. And I really like this, actually. I wish that they would have wrote in small letters what their version of NWA stands for, though. And then they changed, you know, F the police to F the Pope. It's kind of funny. Also, who's this guy? Is this the YouTuber for this channel?
Later, and people broke those rules, and the Bible was translated anyway. People could now directly read the Word of God and interpret it in their own way, which led to an explosion in different schools of thought and churches. The Catholic Church was no longer all-powerful, and the Word of God was no longer simply what you were told. People could think for themselves, and now they could rule themselves. And then later the French and American revolutions were all about self-determination and religion in government. Now let's look back at these 37 smaller independent German nations. In all of this furore, wasn't it just time for the region to unify? But around which of the two strong German powers would it be? Prussia or Austria? Let's compare. Prussia had great water and rail connections with the region. With Prussia, they shared a single common language. They were majority ethnic German, and Prussia had one of the strongest armies on the continent.
Who cares about Austria then? Prussia it is. Unless they have something really good. That's a lot of good stuff.
Austria, however, was on the other side of the mountains, had 100 billion different languages across its territory, was rebellious and fragile from top to bottom, and was a country out of time.
So it's an easy decision.
In fact, Austria was lucky to still exist as a multinational country after the Congress of Vienna. Most other new and...
Ich bin still pretty. That's pretty funny, actually.
Reformed countries had abandoned the because God says so form of government and graduated to the nation-state self-determinism model. But not Austria. She married her way to the top, merging royal families and lands to build this empire. And she wanted to keep it all after the Congress, and that she did. However, the Czechs, Slovaks, Polish, Hungarians, Slovenians, Italians, Serbians, Croatians, Bosnians, Ukrainians and Romanians in her empire had different ideas that came from the Reformation and the Enlightenment. Ironically, one of the last places to unify in this period under the idea of the self-determined nation-state was perhaps the seat of philosophical thought in Europe, Italy. 1866. Those Austrian lands that I mentioned earlier were on the other side of the Alps. Yeah, some of those were filled with Italians. That's a group of people who were currently warring their way across southern Europe, unifying under their flag. And Austria was in the way. They fought 3 wars to unify their lands under the because we said so kind of government. The first war didn't change much. The second war was a mild victory for Italy. The third war, however, came with incredible timing and was incredibly devastating to the future of Austria. The sweet relationship between Austria and Hungary that had worked for so long was souring. A series of wars of independence had to be managed, and worst of all, Hungary itself was in revolt. Prussia, seeing a rising power in the south and the potential downfall of a rival for the German leadership, decided that they might as well consolidate their problems into one easily repayable continental war. Austria was in no shape to lead anything by the end of the war. Not the German Confederation, not Germany, and by this point not even Austria. Hungarians made themselves equal in the empire, which now went by a different name. The king.
So I would argue, you know, yeah, I mean, at this point, they're falling apart. They're definitely just probably not even thinking about Germany anymore.
kingdom and lands represented in the Imperial Council, and the lands of the Holy Hungarian Crown of St. Stephen, or as we know it today, Austria-Hungary. Prussia easily scooped the remains of German Europe, and with a victory over France in yet another war, they declared the birth of the German Empire in the Palace of Versailles, the French seat of power. At this point...
Okay, so I just went with Reich counter number 2. So the First Reich wasn't the Holy Roman Empire? Or was it the Holy Roman Empire under the Catholics, I guess, and that's why it said Reich number 2. Or Reich number 1 before. And now the German Empire would be Reich number 2.
What couldn't Prussia do? Austria-Hungary was a shambles on a rapid descent in power and wealth. It was an absolute tinderbox ready to ignite at the flick of a trigger. World War I. And despite for some reason allying with Austria-Hungary, the pair nearly steamrolled all of Europe fueled by German industry. For the second time in half a century, Germany capitalised over the internal volatility of a neighbouring country to make significant territorial gains, making it as far as 1,500 kilometres from Berlin, and essentially winning in the east, making all of these...
Here's the crazy part. You draw a line right about there. Isn't that about as far... no, actually, I guess he went farther in. I was thinking that was about as far as Napoleon made it in, but no, he definitely pushed farther.
These gains, real and official, at least for a few months. One Treaty of Versailles, one demilitarisation, one hyperinflation, billions in reparations, one Great Depression, 2 decades of economic and social turmoil, and still, again, the country was nearly able to steamroll Europe a second time in the 20th century.
There it is, the Third Reich.
And then, one demilitarisation, one partial deindustrialisation, several occupations, one Cold War partition, half a century of separation, and then finally, unification. And today...
My family in Germany tells me stories of the day that the Berlin Wall came down, and it's so interesting to hear, you know.
Today, this country is stunningly, once again, the economic and industrial centre of Europe, and practically its leader, but not in war this time.
What? Really? For those of you that live in Germany and in Europe in general, would you agree with that? The industrialist capital of Europe?
That's bad, apparently. It's in the boardroom, on the leaderboard, the GDP rankings, the quality of life, and the football. France kept a permanent seat on the UN Security Council because a unified Germany was an incredible threat to them for a century, constantly upsetting Europe, dragging France again and again into catastrophic bloodshed. Until today, France still maintained one of the most expensive militaries in the world. They built the iron and coal community to make war unthinkable by tying their economies together and take access to Germany's vast mineral and geographic.
You know what's really interesting about that? They said what, the fifth biggest or fifth most expensive army in the world? You talk to the average American and they laugh at France. You know, it's not necessarily that they laugh at France, it's that they I don't know. I don't know where it came from, but you talk about France helping in a war, France helping with this or that. And they go, oh no, France, they just surrender. I've heard that so many times. But I mean, I look at France throughout history. I mean, look at this. They've got the fifth most powerful, or what, fifth most expensive, something, whatever they said, military. Then you look at it, Napoleon wasn't that long ago, and people just seem to forget all this. I mean, that was, what, 100 and, I guess, 200 years ago? I mean, that's not that long ago. They did an incredible amount during World War II with the resistance and everything, and just I feel like, I don't know if it's like this in other countries, but I feel like specifically a lot of my American friends need to give France a break. You know, I've heard that many French people don't like Americans, and I get it. Many Americans don't like French. I really don't know why we seem to hate each other, but I like you guys. France, you're a pretty cool country in my book.
Wealth. In a Europe without borders, that's the great equaliser, no? It turns out the Germans turned even that to their advantage. The EU is a free and ready-made market. Germany is, as of 2016, by some measures, the #1 exporting country in the world, competing with China, a country 20 times the size. And there are things that Germany has coped with better than any other Western
Really? Again, really? Can somebody fact-check that for me?
country. After World War II, there was somewhat of a labour shortage, which was apparently something to do with all the working age men dying in catastrophic bloodshed or something, and they plugged the labour shortage with Mediterranean guest workers. the potential collapse of the economy due to the structure of the welfare state and the aging of the population that as of 2016 is taking its toll on Japan, Russia and Eastern Europe, soon to hit China and the West, and is being plugged in the Germany of the 2000s by citizens of the expanding EU, the best and the brightest of working age across the continent coming to Germany to work. That's a steady stream of potential tax-paying skilled workers and, crucially, their consumers, paying for the pensions of the aging and retired Germans, spending their twilight years finding Lebensraum, this time on the sunbeds of the Mediterranean.
That was actually very interesting. I do want, if somebody has some free time, seriously fact check some of that. I know that Germany has a lot of industrial sides to it. Are they really that incredible though? I mean, I believe they're up there, but I mean, Brain for Breakfast is saying they're basically on par with China. That's incredible. I don't think anybody's going to argue that China is just fantastic for exporting. You know, they kill it. There's no way that Germany is on par with them. Maybe I misheard them. But, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, hope you guys dug it. Tomorrow we get back into Caesar, and I'm thinking about, several of you have told me over the last few weeks that kings in general have better battles. And now that we're in a civil war, I might switch back, watch a few by Kings in General, because they do have their Civil War series up now, so really excited about that. And then maybe when I get after the Civil War back into Augustus, I'll jump back to Historia Civilis. I'll figure it out tomorrow. But as for now, I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is Ace and I'm out.